never slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play.
It's a good evening. The article, The Worst of the Worst, published in September 2014 by Evan Hughes, describes the events. In late July 1987, Detroit, USA was experiencing a hot, humid summer. People watching television were used to hearing bad news. Both black communities living in the poor inner-city areas and white communities, mostly residing in cleaner, more affluent suburbs, were accustomed to bad news. Detroit had been the crime capital of America for 3 years. Crack cocaine had virtually swept through the city like a virus, moving from small bags to homes, building to building, accelerating the city's already downward spiral. A special tactical unit of the Detroit Police Department, in conjunction with its narcotics police, was formed. Their mission was to stop the main sources of drug distribution. Now, a team of journalists and cameramen had accompanied this tactical group on their patrols for a year and were planning to show a series of their filmed operations over 5 nights. This 5-part documentary begins with a young reporter standing by the street, facing the camera saying, "In this series we will probably bring you closer to the class struggle than you'd like." The scene cuts to quiet streets and derelict houses in the city's east side, an area that had lost more than half its population since the early 1960s, with very few white residents remaining. No other city in America had ever experienced such a level of population flight. One by one, factories closed, unemployment skyrocketed, then crime and addiction soared. Now, as the camera follows these police officers into homes and moves around, the scenes in most houses are similar. Several men with bare torsos, a pile of cocaine on the table, wads of cash, scales, small bags of drugs, and a dual cassette recorder. The image people see on TV is police officers forcing these individuals to the ground and handcuffing them. The TV report is very good and full of details. Its main focus is on a gang called the Chambers Brothers, who were the first to sell crack in the city and were the primary target of this tactical team. At the time, their estimated weekly profit was $1 million. They were a very elusive group, and for television, their image was exactly what one would expect from a drug gang. A group of young, newly rich black men from a small, dilapidated, poor town who had grown up in Detroit's underworld. The narrative is very repetitive from episodes 1 to 4. However, on the 5th night, in the final and very highly viewed episode, the story takes an unexpected turn. A new individual is introduced who came onto their radar while they were tracking the Chambers. The reporter says that this person sold so much cocaine that they concluded he was actually the Chambers drug supplier. They show a mugshot of this person, one of those taken by the police after an arrest. They placed him high up on the gang hierarchy chart, practically among the city's drug lords. This person's name is Richard Wershe Jr. Richard Wershe Jr., and it's clear from his first picture, is a young man whose beard hasn't even grown yet, with bangs falling over his forehead. He has just turned 18 and is almost the only white face seen among all the black faces in the multi-night documentary. On the streets, he's known as White Boy Rick. Today, after 30 years, White Boy Rick is still a prominent figure in Detroit, a symbol of the peak of the cocaine era. People still tell strange stories from his 1980s decade, some of which are actually true. He genuinely drove a Jeep with Snowman written on the back, hinting that he sold cocaine, even though he didn't even have a driver's license yet. He really wore tracksuits, gold chains and gold belts, and a Rolex encrusted with diamonds. During the research for this article, it became clear that while most police officers remembered every detail of his case, few knew what had happened to him after the 1980s. His legend lives on and still circulates by word of mouth, but there is no news of his real self. I, however, knew where he was. He was last seen 30 years ago in a cell in a prison in a corner of Michigan. This is a bit unusual and strange in the American judicial and criminal system. In May 1987, when he was 17, he was convicted for possessing 8 kilograms of cocaine. He was unlucky and prosecuted and convicted under one of the strictest drug laws ever passed in America. This was a strange law in Michigan for a while, where anyone possessing more than 650 grams of cocaine would be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For comparison, when this law was passed, the average prison sentence for murder convictions in the same state was 10 years. Later, in 2010, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that this sentence for non-homicide offenses was unconstitutional. The total number of people incarcerated under this law nationwide was 129. Of course, Michigan had realized before 1998 that this law was not working and was not effective. Later, even the governor who signed the law admitted that it was the biggest mistake of his career, and almost all those imprisoned under this law were able to use their right to parole and gradually began to be released. Now this boy is the only one still imprisoned under this sentence for a crime he committed as a teenager. All the dangerous drug lords who were his contemporaries and were imprisoned have now been released. I have spoken with him a total of 10 to 12 times and repeatedly with all the police officers who might have known something with informants, old smugglers, FBI agents, family friends, and the prosecutor, everyone I thought might know something about this case. During this time, I often reached contradictory conclusions, and the mystery of this case remains. The puzzling question for me is why this person is still in prison. When he was 8 years old, his father taught him how to set mousetraps in the back alleys of Detroit, which were becoming emptier and emptier every day. His father did strange jobs, selling sports equipment, electrical appliances, satellite dishes, televisions, and similar items. He was a petty con man and hustler, the kind of person people usually suspected. His parents fought many times in front of him and his sister when they were children, and his mother even called the police on his father several times. Rick was 6 when his parents separated, and his mother moved to the suburbs and eventually remarried there. Rick and his sister stayed in the same eastern part of the city with their father. There were still some traces of the post-war boom period, the era when the city was full of car factories, and workers drove the cars their factories produced. Large, well-maintained houses and gardens still look that way. As he entered his teenage years in the early 1980s, the decline of this neighborhood also began. Car factories, which were the hope of these workers, were still there, and the large houses and gardens remained. But people were gradually emptying the area, and the unkempt gardens looked derelict. By 1981-82, almost all the white residents had left. In fact, anyone who could leave had left.
By the mid-1980s, crack had spread to this neighborhood. At 3 or 4 in the morning, addicts could be seen wandering the streets with sunken eyes. Poverty had also become rampant. People queued up in front of a former Chrysler car dealership to get food from a charity that had opened there. While the suburban villas were taking on the prosperous appearance of post-Reagan America, the city center and this eastern part of the city were collapsing. Rick's friends also gradually moved out of the city and towards the suburbs, but he and his family remained. His paternal grandparents also lived across the street, and together they had a sense of attachment to the place. When Rick was 12, he no longer wanted to stay at home. He ran away from school once or twice to his mother, and finally, when he was 13, they agreed that he would live with his mother permanently. When he went there, it was a cultural shock for him. His new school had proper baseball fields. His stay there didn't last long. His mother and her husband gradually started fighting, and his father re-entered his life. Ultimately, his father brought him back to where he was, and these children were left alone at home. Another important event that happened at that time was a trip he took with his grandparents, where he met a cousin who had money, a fancy house, a motorcycle, a Ferrari, a Porsche, and all the trappings. His eyes were open to money and what could be done with it. When they returned home, his sister was gradually getting into crack. She became an addict and befriended a young thief who taught Rick the ways of stealing. And he slowly started breaking into people's houses. His father's source of income was selling weapons. His business was good. From the time his son was 8, he would take him to gun shows. His son was intelligent and interested, and gradually became familiar with different guns. Later, his father also opened a gun shop. Sometimes, he would bring guns home from the shop, and if someone wanted one, he would go to the door and send his son to fetch a few samples from the storage. He would bring them and show them to the customer, and then his father would say, "You saw this one, it's good. Now I have another model, come take a look." Gradually, this boy became more and more familiar with weapons. This was a time when statistics showed that in Detroit, the number of guns was higher than the number of people. Although they didn't ask customers what their business was when selling weapons, given the city's conditions at the time, it wasn't hard to guess that the main customers for these guns were drug gangs. From the late 1970s, the drug dealing business gradually flourished in the city. Heroin became more widespread, then gradually cocaine, then crack. Working in these drug gangs slowly became the best possible job, especially for those who were intelligent, organized, and worked systematically, who could advance very quickly and earn a lot. New ideas, new drugs, new areas, especially crack, turned out to be a very profitable trade. Because it was cheap, even those without much money could buy it, and the poor could also get high with it. With the growth of this business, these gangs also became bolder, more violent, and their income skyrocketed. Revenge killings began and extravagant spending became common. The city became like a war zone. In the eastern part of the city, the drug lords were twin brothers named Johnny and Leo Curry. Johnny was thin, tall, athletic, with a neat, thin mustache. Leo was a bit flashy and loud. Johnny was actually the mastermind and strategist of the operation and managed things in such a way that no significant member of their group was arrested for a long time. They started selling marijuana in the 1970s and then moved on to heroin and cocaine in the 1980s, and they exceptionally dominated Detroit's drug trafficking world for a long time. Johnny lived in a big house near Wershe's. He was a smart man, didn't use drugs himself, never went into rooms where drugs were kept, and never carried much money around with him. He had a very interesting personality. When Rick Wershe was 14, he befriended Johnny's younger brother, who was 9 years older than him. He had a very luxurious car, and Rick would go around with him, mostly pursuing girls and having fun. However, he was very happy to be close to this family. Gradually, he started going to the place where the rest of the gang, including the two main brothers, gathered, and he would hang out there. But he acted cool and didn't show much excitement, so they wouldn't notice him. Just being in that space with them and seeing the Rolexes, Gucci's, and Mercedes up close thrilled him. He slowly changed his behavior and friends, moving more and more towards the criminal world. A significant point in his life during this period is that in 1984, he and his sister were in two separate cars, one of which belonged to their grandmother, and he was sitting in the back. They went to a gas station. The boy went to buy something, and suddenly his sister started honking. He went out and saw an armed man jumping into their grandmother's car and driving away. He jumped into the passenger seat of his sister's car, and they chased the guy. After a few kilometers of pursuit, his sister pulled out a gun and started shooting. He saw this, and the police arrested him right there. But later, when it came to his court date, the police officer did not come to testify, and the case was naturally closed. Keep this incident in mind. We will return to it later. Gradually, Rick started interacting more and more with them. At that time, Johnny had a girlfriend whom he later married named Kathy. Rick was very impressed by her beauty, demeanor, clothing, shopping, and everything about her. Before Johnny, she had been in a relationship with the head of another gang. She was also the niece of Coleman Young, who had been the mayor of Detroit for many years. Rick himself had a girlfriend at the time who was around his age, but she had also previously been Johnny's girlfriend. Even though she was 10 years younger than Johnny, the fact that Rick was with this girl still earned him some respect. Gradually, people started noticing him. It seemed true that he had money, although no one knew exactly where he got it from. He wore expensive Fila sneakers, Adidas track jackets, and most importantly, everyone gradually realized that Johnny seemed to like this boy. It was uncommon for Johnny to have a young white boy sitting next to him in the car and driving around. But Rick had gained this position to the point where this boy, still a teenager, gradually gained access to underground bars where all the important names in the city's drug market gathered. Topless waitresses served them, and people wore tens of thousands of dollars in jewelry and placed wads of cash on the gambling tables just to show they could. This was the atmosphere, and Rick was the only white person in these bars. When he was 15, someone shot him. The shooter swore it was an accident, but Rick wasn't so sure. However, being shot also helped him gain respect and be seen differently. He says, "I only hung out with them. I didn't work with them. I bought cocaine from them a few times, but not for myself. I saw enough addicts around me to not want to get into drugs. I bought from them and sold to others, making some money. Then, I gradually started dealing with a few of my friends. Small-scale retail to the extent that it didn't even matter to Johnny that I was selling so little. He didn't bother me. In the spring of 1985, he dropped out of school. This was when he was close enough to the gang that they took him to Las Vegas to see a boxing match between Tommy Hearns and Marvin Hagler. Tommy Hearns had grown up in Detroit, and these gangs loved him so much that they said whenever he had a big match somewhere, you couldn't find a good dealer in the entire city because they all went there. Now Rick went to Las Vegas with these big, dangerous people to see this match. This was another event that made him famous in the city. A young white boy going around the very expensive shopping mall with 15 black men surrounding him, almost invisible. He was gaining a certain status for himself. His purchases were all expensive and flashy brands. Gucci luggage, expensive jewelry, any expensive jeans, Calvin Klein or Guess or whatever. His father says that this was the period when his daughter became addicted to drugs, and his son became addicted to power and wealth, becoming ill with money. Even though he wasn't old enough for a driver's license yet, his situation was such that he had to have a car. He had 8 cars when he was 10 years old. He had bought a Ford, similar to Johnny's car, which he later lost in a bet. In the beginning, he was also a speed enthusiast and would drive at 160 miles per hour on the highways. But later, he realized that the thrill wasn't worth the risk of being arrested, so he gave it up. However, he still went to the gun shows with his father. This was a time when gun sales were much less regulated. You could pay $20 and get an AK-47 immediately, no ID, no registration, no invoice, nothing. In some of these transactions, he gradually started to bypass his father and pocket the money himself. His father, of course, also knew by then that he was making money from drugs. He once found $50,000 in cash under his bed in a shoebox. He says that at that time, he pulled him aside and told him, "Look, everyone eventually gets caught." He replied, "No, look at Johnny. He's been doing this for so long, and no one's caught him. I'm not giving up this work anytime soon." Johnny was a very cautious person, but it's impossible to run an organization of that size in the dark and remain completely unnoticed. Finally, in 1984, a joint FBI and local police task force began working on his case. They tracked down a series of street dealers and lower-level suppliers, gathering information from them. Then, with that information, they went after some higher-ranking individuals. Some of them, to get protection from the FBI or to get some money, gradually started providing information until the case was more and more complete. Eventually, they got a warrant from a judge and planted a microphone in his basement and tapped his phone. Finally, in 1987, Johnny, his 2 brothers, and 18 other members of their gang were all arrested at once. 2 weeks after Johnny's arrest, Kathy, his wife, knocked on Rick's door. No one could believe that 24-year-old Kathy, with her reputation and connections, would get involved with this 17-year-old boy. Strange stories were also circulated about them at the time, such as one time during a fight, Kathy attacked someone with a cleaver and split a door while the boy was on the other side of it. Or that 2 months after their relationship began, Kathy gave him a 5-carat diamond ring for his birthday. At this time, his situation had also improved. For a year or two, he had been interacting with important people through Johnny, such as someone named Art Derrick, who was then the head of cocaine distribution in Detroit. Estimates say that for 2 years, this person sold cocaine to all the city's major gangs with a daily profit of $100,000. This person was the only white person in this business besides Rick, and he was very extravagant and generous. He had 4 airplanes, one of which had previously belonged to the Rolling Stones. He had marble floors in his basement, mirrored ceilings and walls, a swimming pool with his name written on the tiles, and fast motorboats. He also liked Rick, and as he said, "This boy is like my own son." He started taking him around with him. They would go to Vegas together. The corruption of this person was that he would air freight cocaine from Miami, where it was much cheaper, to Detroit. Rick also knew people there and gradually started bypassing him and bringing the goods directly from there, to the point that at the peak of the market, Rick sold 50 kilograms of cocaine a week. This was a period when crack was also gaining market share, and it was to the extent that even school teachers and General Motors factory workers would come and deal drugs at night. Supply had surpassed demand. Of course, Rick did not sell to consumers or even to small-time dealers. He sold to larger dealers in kilogram quantities. They would either sell the cocaine as is or convert it to crack, and ultimately, the final street value of that 50 kilograms would be several $1,000,000. This was the peak of Rick's business, when his size had become very large and significant. Once during this period, a rival tried to kill him, but he survived. At the same time as these pressures from rivals, the government was also gradually putting pressure, especially as the uproar over the widespread use of crack had risen and politicians were all talking about it. They also once raided his house to arrest him. All the drug-dealing paraphernalia, including bags, scales, money-counting machines, cash, weapons, and everything else, were on him. But the amount of cocaine they found at the scene was very small. They arrested him with that to see if they could get anything out of it, but they didn't get anything substantial. Until the night of July 22, 1987, that night, a police car chased Rick's car all the way to his house with sirens. Rick was sitting in the car with a colleague. When he got out, the police officer saw a bag at the boy's feet, and his colleague said, "Go see what's in this." In the bag was $30,000 in cash. Possessing cash is not a crime, but Rick thought he was going to get caught and got into a struggle with the police officer. A commotion erupted and people came out, his father came out, his sister came out, and in the chaos his father grabbed the bag of money and gave it to his sister. His sister ran to his grandmother's house across the street and hid the bag there. Rick fled and the police called for backup, raided his grandmother's house, and finally found the bag. Rick was arrested 2 or 3 blocks away, handcuffed, and taken away. During the arrest, they had also struggled, and he had taken a few punches, so he was taken directly to the hospital. A few hours later, an anonymous person called the police and said that before he was arrested, this boy had hidden cocaine in a box under the eaves of a neighbor's house. They went and saw that, yes, there were 8 kilograms of cocaine in the box. Rick was released on bail. This is where his name, which we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, was broadcast on WXYZ. Newspapers printed his photo with his case number on the front page. When he went to a basketball game at the stadium, all the cameras showed him and he became a famous figure. In October of the same year, he was arrested again, this time with 5 kilograms. The day he was released from this arrest, they immediately raided his father's and grandparents' houses and confiscated a lot of weapons, drug-dealing equipment, and paraphernalia. Although nothing could be directly linked to him, he knew that he was in big trouble. He had to go to court in 3 months for that initial 8 kilograms, and he knew that if he was convicted in that court, he would go to prison for life without the possibility of parole. In January 1988, Rick Wershe, along with his parents and lawyer, came to court. His lawyer was a theatrical lawyer, one of those who make a big scene in court, and he had previously represented the heads of several gangs and mafias. He was also somewhat accused of having connections with these gangs. This boy's hope was that there was no physical connection between him and that box of cocaine that was under the eaves. In the court hallways, he was very cheerful, joking with reporters and teasing them. The lawyer's argument was that the police themselves had planted the drugs there to cover up the incident of them beating and assaulting this man and to divert the course of the trial. Today, when you talk to Wershe, he admits that the cocaine was his. He says, "Yes, it was mine." In fact, it was a package that had arrived an hour or 2 earlier, and one of his partners, hearing the sirens and the police, had hidden it there. Nevertheless, the lawyer managed to cast some doubt on the case. The jury also had trouble making a decision, and their work took 4 days. During this time, the defendant was telling jokes and laughing in the hallways, and he was cheerful. So, when the verdict was read after 4 days and he heard he was convicted, he collapsed with a completely blank expression and fell into his mother's seat. His mother started crying silently. His father put his jacket under his arm and, despite the judge's order, walked out of the courtroom. Then he came outside and told a police officer who was there, "You won't get a good night's sleep." He was immediately arrested on charges of threatening a police officer. They found a silencer among his belongings, and more evidence was found, and he was sent to jail. From jail, his father gave several interviews, and in all these interviews, he told a seemingly unbelievable story. He said that he and his son were both police informants. He claimed that the government used him and his son to gather information about drug dealers in the east side of the city, but when they were done, they spit in his face. This was a strange claim, and the timing of its presentation was also strange. If this boy, white boy Rick, really worked for the police and the FBI as his father said, why did none of his lawyers ever mention this? Besides, this family was not exactly trustworthy people. In the same interviews, his father would say that they made all their money from legal gun dealing. He told reporters, "I can make $1 million this year." These were claims no one would believe from someone living in that part of the city and in that situation. This also helped no one to believe him. The FBI also said at the time that they would neither confirm nor deny such a claim as per organizational policy. However, the local police immediately denied it. The lawyer himself also said that something like this was absolutely impossible. Maybe his father, but not his son, could have been an informant. The father also mentioned the name of an officer named Dixon, saying that this officer was their contact at the FBI. Of course, that person also did not give any clear answer, but said that the claim that the law and the judiciary betrayed them was ridiculous. Dixon retired that same year and has never publicly said anything about this case. Dixon now spends his retirement in the Detroit suburbs, occasionally participating in recreational fishing competitions. As the author of this article, I contacted him several times to speak with him, and he did not want to talk, and each time he would say, "Who are you? Where do you want to write? Why do you want this?" These kinds of questions. Then, gradually, I told him that I had spoken with many of his old colleagues and mentioned their names one by one, described them, and referenced them. He softened a bit. At first, we talked about the other gangs, and he reminisced about the Curry brothers case. In the middle of the conversation, he hinted that there was an informant who provided them with information. I asked if his informant was probably Richard Wershe. He paused for a very long time and then said, "Why, yes." "Okay, now keep this story here. We'll go back a little." 3 years before Wershe's arrest, on a steamy morning in 1984, their doorbell rang. His father opened the door and saw 2 FBI agents. They asked, "Can we come in for a few minutes?" Wershe Sr. had known these FBI agents for years. His gun shop was across town near a police firing range, where various agents came to buy parts and equipment for their weapons during training. Over the years, they had gradually become acquainted. Since the FBI had entered these drug wars, these local officers had helped him a few times. They had indirectly looked out for his daughter. For example, if there was trouble brewing, they would call him to pick up his daughter. Once, they even helped him out of trouble with an illegal weapon he had. Now they came to his house to see how the FBI could leverage this friendly relationship. They pulled out a few photos and showed them to him, asking, "Can you tell us anything about these people? Who are they?" His father had limited information because to keep his gun business running well, he hadn't gotten too involved with his customers, effectively keeping himself out of trouble. However, his son peeked his head out from the other room to see what they were saying. It soon became clear that the son was more useful to the agents than the father. At that time, the son had not yet started hanging out with the Curry brothers gang, but he had sold weapons to some of the people in the photos and could help identify them. Wershe Sr. says, "I saw in his eyes how important he felt. He had something the FBI was looking for. He thought he was in these movies." He told them what he knew, and the police officers genuinely said, "Sir, your son was a big help to us today." They left, and 10 days later, they returned with an envelope full of cash and said, "We want you to be an FBI informant." Wershe Sr. says, "I knew that by agreeing to something like this in a neighborhood like ours, I was playing with my life. But my financial situation wasn't good, and at the same time, I thought I was doing the right thing because I was helping the FBI to round up drug dealers from the streets." Internal FBI documents show that this claim is true. On this date, Wershe Sr. was registered as an informant in FBI offices, and he was allocated a salary. He says, "Our agreement with my son was to split the money 50-50. The son was 14 years old. FBI guidelines do not prohibit using children as informants, but they state that information provided by them must be verified with extra care. Of course, Wershe Jr.'s name is not in the records. However, older officers who were involved at the time confirm that the father did not have specific information. One of them says, "Yes, the father didn't know anything specific, but the son seemed to know everything." From this point in the story, the father and son claim that the FBI agents gradually started meeting with the son without the father's presence. The 14-year-old son would borrow his mother's car and go across town to talk to the FBI agents. Of course, the FBI denies these claims, saying that they never spoke with him without his father present. However, there is a consensus that they did receive information from this person. The information initially came in bits and pieces: drug houses he identified, the name of a clinic that secretly sold prescription drugs, or money or weapons that a group had stolen. Gradually, his work leveled up and he started giving information about important figures in crime. Once, he gave them information about a house where a lot of money, cocaine, and illegal weapons were kept. Based on the information this boy provided, they obtained a warrant from a judge, raided the house, and found everything. Rick Wershe says, "It was very exciting. What 14 or 15-year-old boy wouldn't want to be an undercover police officer? I would go to remote parts of the city and meet them. Then they would drive me back to my neighborhood in a private car. I would lie down so they wouldn't be recognized from outside. And they would show me houses where an operation was underway, or where drugs were being sold, or where there was a plan. And they would start raiding the houses, and they would pay me for this information, and the money they gave me, I would take it. I would use it to buy cocaine. From my cocaine purchases, they would again gather evidence of crime because they would understand that drugs were being sold in that house. Then I would sell that cocaine myself and profit from it. His father now says, I regret introducing my son to the police as much as I regret letting him get involved with these drug dealers. One day, I looked out the window and saw a police officer drop him off and leave without even talking to me. Then I saw his pocket was bulging with cash. I said, "Let me see," and I searched his pocket and saw that they had given him $2,000, a 14-year-old boy. Now that we know he had this relationship with the police and the FBI, it helps us understand how he grew so quickly in the city's drug scene. It helps us understand why the police officer who witnessed the shooting incident at the gas station and arrested him on the scene never came to testify in court. The police officer later says that one of his colleagues who worked with Wershe asked him not to go to court so that they could continue to work with this boy. The information in the FBI files is limited, and much of the money they received was given by local police and was not recorded anywhere. However, Wershe's estimate and FBI documents show that they received something between $10,000 and $20,000 from the FBI. Both Wershe himself and the first officer who worked with him confirmed that before this boy started working as an informant, he was not involved in drug dealing. He had done some petty theft, but he hadn't dealt drugs. But when he started making money, things changed. As one of the FBI officers says, "We brought him into the world of drugs ourselves. We pushed him. So why, when the guy grew up and became powerful, are we attacking him?" One of the officers who worked with Wershe was from that special tactical unit that was pursuing the main drug distribution gangs, including the Curry brothers. Wershe says, "When I recognized Boo, who was the younger Curry brother, and recognized the rest of the gang, they had actually been working with the FBI as informants for a while. My impression was that they had truly become friends with Boo, and I tried several times to somehow explain to this agent that this boy was not really a big player. He wasn't worth pursuing. The others, for example, were criminals." Wershe's relationship with the older brothers was also a mixed feeling of fear and great respect. And on the other hand, he knew that they would not tolerate betrayal. He also liked the excitement of the job, and in his childish innocence, he had put himself in a very, very dangerous situation. FBI documents show how valuable he was to them, not only for getting information about the gang itself, but also for identifying police officers who were collaborating with this gang. One report states that we received information from this source including the names and addresses of police officers who are taking money from the Currys. And another report states that, based solely on information provided by this boy, we obtained more than 10 search warrants from a judge in a single day. Wershe says that his trip to Las Vegas at the time of the Hagler-Hearns fight was made possible thanks to the FBI, who helped him get fake IDs to make him seem older, and also paid for his hotel bills and expenses so he could go there and monitor the Curry group, find their connections, and gather information on those from whom they were buying drugs. He says, "It was my first trip by plane. I was like the movie Home Alone. I was alone. My pockets were full of money. No one was watching over me. I could buy whatever I wanted, eat whatever I wanted. What could be better?" As the author of this report, when I heard this story, it was very unbelievable to me that the federal government would send a 15-year-old boy with a dangerous gang with fake IDs and a lot of money to Las Vegas. When I think about all the dangers and responsibilities that such an operation could entail, it is difficult for me to even imagine it. But when I saw the FBI documents, it became clear to me that it was indeed true. $1,500 was allocated as expenses for this trip. There's also an interesting anecdote. Once, in the middle of the operation, the liaison officer changed. The new officer, a man named Grumman, says, "When I read the file, I was going to see the informant for the first time. I expected to see a middle-aged man. When I went to the first meeting, I saw Wershe. His father came and brought a boy with him. I was surprised. I thought, what a strange father-son relationship they have. One day, the father is an informant, and he brought his son to the meeting. Then I asked the first question, and I saw that the father started making a commotion and revealed everything, and then the son revealed everything.